Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Rosh HaShanah, and we will be learning today Mir Hashem Daf Nun Dalet Amud Aleph, and I hope a good piece of Nun Dalet Amud Beis as well. We pick up on the bottom line of Nun Gimel Amud Beis in Siman Tov Kuf Pei Aleph at Sif Dalet. Says the Mechaber, Mechabsin, we are allowed to do laundry, Umistaprin, and you can take haircuts Erev Rosh HaShanah on Erev Rosh HaShanah. Not only you're allowed to, but the language of the Mechaber is we do. Mechabsin, we wash laundry, we wash clothes so that we should have fresh clothing. Umistaprin, and we take a haircut. Lekavod Rosh Hashanah. Erev Rosh Hashanah, we can do this on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Neskan Chafei, Mechabsin Umistaprin Erev Rosh Hashanah, Laharois, in order to show Sha'anu Betuchin Bechasto Yisparach, that we have full trust and full faith in the kindness of the Ribbono Shel Olam, Sheyotzi L'Tzedek Mishpatenu, that he will judge us favorably. Nevertheless, L'Yilbash B'Rosh Hashanah Bigdei Rikma Umeshi. However, it is not proper. A person should not wear on Rosh Hashanah embroidered clothing, silk clothing, Kibisha'ar Yomtiv, as he would on another Yomtiv, D'Yehei Meir Hadin Olav, because there's a balance over here. On the one hand, we have to act in a somber, solemn way. We have to have yira. We have to have the fear of the Ribbono Shel Olam's din. Ki lo yitztak lefanecha kol chai, we say in Slichas, that we recognize that nobody is truly perfect, nobody is truly justified in front of the Ribbono Shel Olam. So we do have to have an emas hadin, so we don't wear extra fancy clothing. At the same time, we have to show that we are batuach in the Ribbono Shel Olam's chasadim, in the Ribbono Shel Olam's kindness, and the Ribbono Shel Olam will accept our tefillas and he will accept our tshuva. Ella, rather, the Chavetz Chaim says, Yilbash begadim levanim noim, you should wear nice white clothing. That was the minhag in those days. They wore white, apparently. This is brought down from the Taz in the name of the Marshal. V'ayin b'magen Avram, but if you look at the Magen Avram, Siman Tov Kuf Tzadik Zayin, the b'makom she'enai hagin lilbosh levanim, in places like ours, where the minhag is not to wear white. We generally don't wear white suits on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Al kalpanim lo yilbash chashuvim kolkach. You shouldn't wear, so don't wear your fanciest suit. Don't wear the suit that you bought for your child's chasana. Put on a nice Shabbos, nice Shabbos suit, a nice Shabbos shirt, but you don't put on your extra fancy begadim, because again, you do have to show emas hadin. Says the Rama on the top of Nun Dalet Amud Aleph, V'yesh noyagin, there are those who have the commendable minhag, litboil be'erev Rosh Hashanah mishum keri, to go to the mikvah on Erev Rosh Hashanah so that they could become tahar from tumas keri, the tumah that comes from a seminal emission of any kind. So there are those who have the minhag to go to the mikvah on Erev Rosh Hashanah. V'yesh b'kaimais, and there are those places noyagin leilech ala kfaros, where they have the minhag to go visit the Beis Olam, to go visit a Beis HaKfaros on Erev Rosh Hashanah, ulahar bo sham betchinais, and to be marbe in tefillah in the Beis HaKfaros, v'noistim tzedakah la'aniyim, and to give tzedakah to the aniyim. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chavav nagid litboil, there are those who have the minhag to go to the mikvah. V'emeina yachal litboil mishum tzina, if it's not practicable, if somebody cannot go to the mikvah, the case of the Chavetz Chaim over here is mishum tzina, if one doesn't have the ability to go to the mikvah because of the cold. Let's remember, many people lived in a locale where they didn't have a mikvah. They went to natural bodies of water. So if it's in a locale where it's cold on Erev Rosh Hashanah and it's not practicable to be toivel, yireh lishpach al gufay tisha kabin mayim, he should pour over his body tisha kabin of water, because that could also be matar you from tumas keri. You should not go to the mikveh until at least 1 hour before chatzos. There are those achrayim that write that it is proper. It would be proper for one to refrain from having marital relations on either of the 2 nights of Rosh Hashanah. With the exception of if his wife is going to the mikveh on one of those nights. Because in that case, there's a mitzvah to be mekayim the mitzvah of oina to be with his wife on the night she goes to the mikvah. And in that case, they could, v'yachzor v'yitbal b'shachris. However, he should see to it to go to a mikvah and to be metayar himself from tumas keri in the morning, Rosh Hashanah morning. So, the Chavetz Chaim brings this down from Yesh Me'achronim. Yesh Me'achronim shekasvu. There are achronim that write this hakpada. Achein, however, Elu ha'anoshim ha'oichlim l'soiva bitnam. Literally, what the Chavetz Chaim says here is, those who eat to satisfy their stomachs. What does that mean? Well, there's two very different ways a person can eat. A person can eat having in mind that he's eating l'shem shamayim, so that he should nourish his guf, and he should have kayach to be Oved Hashem. That type of eating is an exalted type of eating. That type of eating is l'shem shamayim. It's a mitzvah. It's actually mekadesh the guf. It sanctifies the physical body, that type of eating. Then you have a person who eats because he's hungry. He eats because he's hungry, and he wants to satisfy his physical urges. So, says the Chavetz Chaim, a person who's on the level where he eats l'soiva bitnam, where his eating is just to satisfy his physical urges, such a person, oy chas v'shalom, shenichnas b'machshavto hir isha, or you have another person who, it's Rosh Hashanah night, and he has a desire. He has a hir isha, he's thinking about a woman in his mind. Yarzer tayv sheyishamish mitasai, it would be better that he should have relations with his wife, mechas v'shalom sheyav lidei avera, and not that he should refrain from having relations with his wife, and instead he should come to a different avera. Maybe he'll come to Keri, maybe he'll come to Ashchas Hazera, or something else, chas v'chalila. So don't go ahead and be mekayim this hakpada that's brought down in the name of the Achrayim, and instead risk being over a different avera. Or I would venture to say, even if a person is in a situation where he has a very strong desire, and if it's something that's going to be on his mind over Rosh Hashanah, over Yom Adin, when he's standing in shul and he's being mispal, and instead of having the emes adin and the kavanas atfilah front and foremost on his mind, if he's going to be having taiva on his mind, better do what's mutter, have relations with your wife Rosh Hashanah night, and so be it. But the Chavetz Chaim says, but he should go ahead and he should be taival in a mikvah Rosh Hashanah morning in order to be matar himself from tumas keri. As Kan Chav Zayin, the Ramah said, there are those who have the minhag to go to the Beis HaKvaros. The Chavetz Chaim explains why. The Beis HaKvaros hu makom menuchas tzadikim, because the Beis HaKvaros is a place where there are many tzadikim that are laying over there. Va'tfilo niskablo sham yoiser, and the tfilas to the Rabbeinu Shalom are accepted by the Rabbeinu Shalom quicker in the Beis HaKvaros, where you're surrounded by tzadikim that are interred in the ground. In the schus of those tzadikim, the tfilas are makubal. However, says the Mishnah Berurah, al yosim megamasai neged amesim. Don't put your hope in the mesim. Don't be davening chas v'chalila to the mesim. Yevakesh be'Hashem yisbarach. You should only be asking from the Rabbeinu Shalom sheyiten alav rachamim, that the Rabbeinu Shalom should have rachmanas on you, b'schus hatzadikim sheichnan afar, in the merit of those tzadikim who have already passed on and who are interred over there in the Beis HaKvaros. And the Chavetz Chaim writes, v'yakif hakvaros, you should go around the kvaros, v'yiten tzedakah, and you should give tzedakah, kaidem sheyoymar hatchinos, before your mispal. Ve'ein leilach al kever echad shtei pamim b'yom echad, and the Chavetz Chaim brings down a hakpada that you're not supposed to go to one kever multiple times on the same day. Okay, now we go to Siman Tafkuf Beis. Seder Tfilas Aseres Yimei Tshuva Rosh Hashanah, the proper order of the davening during Aseres Yimei Tshuva and on Rosh Hashanah, Ubay Tes Seifim, and here we have 9 Seifim. Says the Makaber in Sif Aleph, Ba'aseres Yimei Tshuva Omer HaMelech HaKadosh, HaMelech HaMishpat. During Aseres Yimei Tshuva, when we daven Shemona Esrei, when we come to the bracha of HaKadosh, we end off the bracha Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, the King who is holy, not Hakel HaKadosh, the Almighty who is holy. And so too, when we come to the bracha of Hashiva Sheftenu, we end off the bracha Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaMishpat, the king of Mishpat, the king of judgment, not HaMelech Ohev Tzedakah uMishpat, the king who loves tzedakah, righteousness, charity, uMishpat, and din. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Cotton Aleph. Ba'aseres Yimei Tshuva, the Maharil Kosav, the Maharil writes, there are those places where they have the minhag to say yotzros, to say ma'aravis, to say piyutim in the middle of the davening of Ma'ariv on the 2 nights of Rosh Hashanah. But the Chavetz Chaim says, however, we do not have that minhag in our regions. The yotzros, if you look in those piyutim that are inserted in the Berchas Kriya Shema of Ma'ariv on Rosh Hashanah night, they are shiros v'tishbachos. They're praises, songs of praise to the Rabbeinu Shalom. And we know that we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah because we are taught that when Sifrei Chaim Umeisim Psuchim Lefanav, when the Rabbeinu Shalom is sitting in judgment and he has the Sifrei Chaim, the book of life, with Sifrei Meisim, and the book of death, Chas Chalila, opened in front of him, that's not a time for shiros v'tishbachos. That's not a time for singing songs of praise. That's a time for beseeching and reciting supplications to the Rabbeinu Shalom. So the same way we don't say Hallel, we also do not say these types of yotzros by Ma'ariv on Rosh Hashanah. Oid kasav b'shem minhagim, the minhagin akal loymar pasuk tiku b'chayde shofar, that we have the minhag that by Ma'ariv, before Shemona Esrei, we say the pasuk of tiku b'chayde shofar b'kesel yom chagenu, ki chayk li Yisrael hu mishpat leloy ke Yaakov. Just as on Friday night, before Shemona Esrei, we say v'shabru b'nei Yisrael es ha-Shabbos, and on Yom Tov we say v'yidar b'Moshe es me'ed Hashem el b'nei Yisrael. On Rosh Hashanah we say tiku b'chayde shofar. V'lo have a hefsek, and this is not considered a hefsek. It's not considered that we're making an interruption bein geula l'tfila, between the bracha of geula and the davening. We know that we always have a chiyuv. We have to be soimech geula l'tfila. We have to begin our Shemona Esrei. We'd have to daven to the Rabbeinu Shalom after mentioning geula. So this pasuk of tiku b'chayde shofar is not considered a hefsek, and the reason it's not considered a hefsek, the Ramah brings down, the reason it's not considered a hefsek is because when we mention Tekiyah Shofar, that's an allusion to the Geula, because we know we have the pasuk that says, Bayomahu Yitaka B'Shofar Gadol. On the day of the Geula Shlema, the Rabbeinu Shalom will blow in the Shofar Gadol. So mentioning Tekiyah Shofar is an allusion to Geula, and therefore the pasuk of Tiku is not considered a hefsek between Geula and Tefillah. As cotton bays, we say HaMelech HaKadosh. Why do we say HaMelech HaKadosh during Aseres Yimei Tshuva and Rosh Hashanah? Mishum she'achshav hem Yimei Din, because now we're standing in the Yemei Hadin, in the days of judgment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev v'dan kol ha'olam, when the Rabbeinu Shalom is sitting in judgment and judging the entire world. Umareh malchusai umemshaltai, and he displays his kingship. That's what a king does. A king judges his subjects. So when the Rabbeinu Shalom sits in judgment during the Yemei Yamim Neirayim, that's when we say HaMelech HaKadosh, because that's a way of showing his malchus. Shehu b'kol mashallah, the Rabbeinu Shalom who rules over all. So we say HaMelech HaKadosh and HaMelech HaMishpat. Continues the Mechaber here in Sif Aleph. V'imta, if somebody makes a mistake and he does not say HaMelech HaKadosh, he says Hakel HaKadosh, Oy shehu mesupik, or even if somebody is not sure, he finishes Shemona Esrei, and he says, I don't know, I'm not sure if I said HaKel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh. Imhu HaMelech HaKadosh, if the mistake or the doubt is in the bracha of HaMelech HaKadosh, where he's not sure if he said HaMelech or HaKel, or he knows he said HaKel, Chayzel Rosh, he has to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei. So, if somebody is davening Shemona Esrei, he's holding in the middle of the bracha of Rifa'enu, and now suddenly he reminds himself, oh, you know, it's Aseres Yimei Tshuva, and I'm not sure if I said HaKel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh. He has to stop where he is, go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei, and start again. If he finished the whole Shemona Esrei, he's got to repeat Shemona Esrei. V'imhu b'HaMelech HaMishpat, if the mistake or the doubt is in the bracha of HaMelech HaMishpat, then the Mechaber says, and this is not the way we paskin, but the Mechaber says, Im nizkar koidem she'akar raglav, if he reminds himself before the end of Shemoneh Esrei. So let's say the person is holding in the middle of Moedim, and he reminds himself, oh no, I didn't say HaMelech HaMishpat, chayzer leberkas hashiva, he has to go back to Hashiva Shavtenu, correct his mistake, va'omer misham ve'elech ala seder. So he was holding in the middle of Moedim, and now he reminds himself, I don't think I said HaMelech HaMishpat. He has to stop where he is, go back to Hashiva Shavtenu, and continue Shemoneh Esrei from there. V'im loy nizkar ad she'akar raglav, and if he doesn't remember until he finishes Shemoneh Esrei and he moves his feet, Eisa Shalom b'Roimov, Ayin la'el Sof Siman Kuf Yod Zayin Sif Hey, and we'll speak about that in a moment, Chayzel l'Roish, he has to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. And the Ramah ends off, Ayin la'el Siman Kuf Yod Ches. So over here so far, what we have is like this. The Mechaber said, during Aseres Yimei Tshuva, in the Yomim Noraim, you say HaMelech HaKadosh instead of HaKel HaKadosh, and you say HaMelech HaMishpat instead of HaMelech Ohev Tzedakah u'Mishpat. And the Mechaber said, if you have made a mistake, if you said HaKel HaKadosh, or if you have a doubt, you're not sure, if you said HaKel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh, then you have to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. If you finish Shemoneh Esrei, you got to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. If you remember the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, you got to stop and go back to the beginning and say it over again. When it comes to the question of HaMelech HaMishpat, it depends. If you're still in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, when you remember, you go back to Hashiva Shavtenu. If you finished Shemoneh Esrei, then you got to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. That's what the Mechaber said. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Gimel. Ois Shehu Mesupik. The Mechaber said, if you made a mistake and you said the wrong thing, or if you're in doubt, you're not sure if you said HaMelech or you didn't. So in both those cases, the Mechaber said you have to go back. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. The chazaka mashehu ragil hu mazkir. The reason why you have to go back if you're in doubt is because if you're not sure if you said HaKel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh, then the assumption is you said what you're used to saying. And every day when you daven Shemoneh Esrei 3 times, you say HaKel HaKadosh. So if you're in doubt, Mistama, you defaulted to what you're used to. Mistama, you said HaKel HaKadosh. Very interesting. The Chavetz Chaim throws out like this. He says, we know we have the same problem by Mashav Ruach Amar Dagoshim. A person during the rainy season, during the winter, a person has to say in the bracha of Mechayim Esim, he has to say Mashav Ruach Amar Dagoshim. And we're afraid that he's going to forget. And if he has a doubt, we're going to assume that he said what he's used to saying. So if he davens Dusach Sfarad, he's going to say Marid Atol. Or if he davens Dusach Ashkenaz, he's not going to say anything. But he's not going to say Mashav Ruach. And over there in Halacha, they give an Eitzah. They say, you know what you should do? On Sukkot, after you bench Geshem, you should say 90 times, Mechayim Eisabata Rav Loishia Mashav Ruach Marid Agoshem. If you say it 90 times, then you change the chazaka. Now already you have a chazaka that when you say Mechayim Eisabata Rav Loishia, the next words are going to be Mashav Ruach Marid Agoshem. And now if you have a doubt, we don't have a problem, because now your default is going to be to say Mashav Ruach Marid Agoshem. So suggests the Chavetz Chaim, why don't we have the same Eitzah here? Instead of saying that the halacha is that if you have a doubt, if you said HaKel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh, you have to repeat it because we assume you said HaKel HaKadosh. Why don't we just tell you, you should say 90 times, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh. And then if you have a doubt, we'll assume that you went into the default position of saying HaMelech HaKadosh, because you established a new chazaka of saying HaMelech HaKadosh. So the Chavetz Chaim explains that while that works by Mashav Ruach Marid Agoshem, it does not work by HaMelech HaKadosh. Why? Just finding the place again, I'm sorry. Over here, saying it 90 times would not be effective. Like by Mashav Ruach Marid Agoshem and Siman Kuf Yodal. Why? The Hacha Eina Rashay Loimar Baruch Atah Hashem what are you going to say? You can't say Baruch Atah and then say Hashem's name to have a bracha levatala, because that would be a bracha levatala. You can't just say 90 times Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh with Hashem's name, enunciating Hashem's name. That would be making 90 brachas levatalis. So what are you going to do? V'im yomer b'lo shem, and if you're going to say Baruch Atah HaMelech HaKadosh or Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, im kain batfila kishiyomer b'shem yachzil limud loyma Baruch Atah Hashem HaKadosh. How are you going to establish a new chazaka that you're saying HaMelech HaKadosh if you're changing the words that come before it? If 90 times you say Baruch Atah HaMelech HaKadosh or Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, so yes, now you have a chazaka that every time you say Baruch Atah Hashem, you're going to end it HaMelech HaKadosh. But in Shemona Esrei, you're not going to say Baruch Atah Hashem. You're going to say Baruch Atah and you're going to say Hashem's name. So for that, you're going to fall back to your hergel of saying HaKadosh. So this eitzah is not effective. Hilkach Leslie Takanta. Ois Katan Daled Chayzel Rosh. If you goofed and you said HaKadosh or you Mesupik, Chayzel Rosh, you go back to the beginning. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, why do you have to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei? Look, what did we say by Hashiva Shavteinu? We said that if, according to the Mechaber, if you didn't say HaMelech HaMishpat, right, so then you have to go back to Hashiva Shavteinu, because that's the bracha that you messed up. You messed up the bracha of Hashiva Shavteinu. You were supposed to say HaMelech HaMishpat, and you said something else. So you have to go back to Hashiva Shavteinu. So over here, if you said HaKadosh instead of HaMelech HaKadosh, why do you have to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei? Why don't you just go back to HaKadosh? Why do you have to go back all the way to the beginning? So explains the Chavetz Chaim. The shalosh brachos rishonos chashuvim ka'achas. The first 3 brachas of Shemona Esrei are considered one bracha. And if you mess up HaKadosh, you messed up Magen Avraham also. You have to go all the way back to the beginning. Now, why are they considered one bracha? So in Siman Kuf Yud Daled, the Ramah says this. In Siman Kuf Yud Daled, the Ramah says that the first 3 brachas are considered one bracha. And over there, the Mishnah Berurah explains, and the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'hatam," the reason why the first 3 brachas of Shemona Esrei are considered one bracha is because the Gimel Rishonos in Yonam Echad. All of the first 3 brachas of Shemona Esrei are covering the same concept. What's that? L'sader shvachai shel makayim, in order to mention the praises of the Rebbeinu Shalom, kaidem she'elas tzrachav, before you embark on asking the Rebbeinu Shalom for your needs. So before we get to Atachayim V'Adam Das, and before we get to Re'eva Anyenu, and before we get to Rifa'enu, before we start asking the Rebbeinu Shalom for our needs, first we spend time praising the Rebbeinu Shalom. Those first 3 brachas of Shemona Esrei are the brachas where we praise the Rebbeinu Shalom. So they are considered one unit. And if you mess up one of them, you got to go all the way back to the beginning. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'im Rosh HaShanah v'Yom Kippurim. How about if during the davening on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Kippur, noidaloi shehispalal al haseder, you realize that you davened the proper Shemona Esrei, you davened the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Shemona Esrei, loymar uvechein tein pachtecha. So a person, unfortunately, he's spaced out, and in middle of his Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur davening, and he already passed the bracha of HaMelech HaKadosh, and he's not sure if he said HaMelech HaKadosh or he said HaKadosh, but he knows that he said uvechein tein pachtecha. So he knows that he davened the Rosh Hashanah Shemona Esrei. Now what do? Do we say that he probably said HaKadosh, or do we assume that he said HaMelech HaKadosh? Says the Chavetz Chaim, so he knows, he knows that he davened the proper Shemona Esrei of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He knows he said V'chein Tei Pachtecha, which comes before the bracha of HaMelech HaKadosh. Rak shemesupik b'gemara bracha, but he is in doubt how he closed off the bracha im siyam HaMelech HaKadosh. He's not sure if at the end of the bracha he said HaMelech HaKadosh or HaKadosh. Over here says the Chavetz Chaim, efshir it's possible de'ein tzarich lachzor. Over there it's possible to say that it could be he does not have to repeat Shemona Esrei. De'ulai lo shoyach loymar bazeh kehergel l'shaynai b'chol hashana. Because what again? What's the reason why if you're Mesupik you have to repeat Shemana Esrei? Because we assume that you slipped into your default. Your default all year round is to say Hakel HaKadosh. So, Mistama, you said Hakel HaKadosh. But if you know that you said V'chein Tein Pachtecha, that means you're not davening the regular Shemana Esrei of all year round. You're davening the Rosh Hashanah Shemana Esrei. The default of the Rosh Hashanah Shemana Esrei is HaMelech HaKadosh, not Hakel HaKadosh. So ulai lo shaykh loimer bazek ergel l'shoyna b'chol hashana. Maybe now we don't worry that you did what you do all year round. Machmas hataysafais, because you have all of these additions to the Shemana Esrei. Shemoisef loimer kodim siyam abracha. You have v'chein teit pachtecha and the other paragraphs that all come before HaMelech HaKadosh, and you know that you said those. So Mistama, you slipped into the default of Rosh Hashanah, and Mistama, you said HaMelech HaKadosh. Ois cut nehei, the Ramah put in here, Ayin la'el soif simin kuf yud zayin sif hei, v'ayin sham Mishnah Berurah sif cut yud ches. And what that's referring to is the Mechaber said over here, in the context of Hashiva Sheftenu, he said that if you imloy niskar ad sha'okar raglov, if you didn't remember your mistake until you moved your feet, that means already until Oisa Shalom, you already stepped out of Shemana Esrei, you took 3 steps back. So if you didn't remember until you moved your feet, then you have to repeat Shemana Esrei. The Mishnah Berurah over there in Kuf Yud Ches, in Kuf Yud Zayin, the Mishnah Berurah in Kuf Yud Zayin, Sifkat Yud Ches says it doesn't necessarily have to be that you already moved your feet. It doesn't have to be necessarily that you already took 3 steps back. Even if you already said Hashem Tsuri V'Gayali, which immediately precedes when you take 3 steps back, saying Yehiyu L'Ratzayin already ends your Shemana Esrei, and now if you remember that you made a mistake, after saying Yehiyu L'Ratzayin, you have to go back to the beginning of Shemana Esrei. Because you're already Mesiach Das. Once you say Yehiyu L'Ratzayin Im Reifi, you're already in your mind, you finished your Shemana Esrei. The Mechaber said over here that when it comes to HaMelech HaMishpat, if you goofed and you didn't say HaMelech HaMishpat, if you said HaMelech Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat, you have to go back. But over there in Kuf Yud Ches, the Sham Pasek HaRamah LaHalacha, over there the Ramah Paskins Halacha L'Maisa, Dim Amar Melech Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat, that's our girsa, our regular year-round Shemana Esrei. In Hashiva Sheftenu, we say Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat. The Ramah says if you said that, then Kevan Shehizkir Melech, since you said the word Melech, so you mentioned the Malchus of the Rabbeinu Shalom, Ein Tzarech Lachzor, you do not have to repeat Shemana Esrei. V'ayin Sham Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Gimel Mashe Kasavnu Sham B'Shem Ha'achronim Bazeh. So this is the way we paskin. We paskin like the Ramah in Siman Kuf Yud Ches, that we don't go back for not saying HaMelech HaMishpat. If we say Melech Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat instead of HaMelech HaMishpat, we don't go back because we mentioned Melech. The only time the psak of the Mechaber applies is if you didn't say Melech Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat. If you said Baruch Atah Hashem Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat without saying Melech, then the psak of the Mechaber would hold true and you would have to go back. Okay, this that the Mishnah Berurah says over here, that you should look at Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Gimel, what he writes in Siman Kuf Yud Ches, he's referring to the halacha that if you remember Toich Kedei Dibur, if within the time it takes to say 3 words, Shalom Alecha Rabbi, if in that time period, after saying Melech Ohev Tzedakah O Mishpat, you remember your mistake, you should correct it by saying HaMelech HaMishpat. Okay, now we go to Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, Im Amar Hakel HaKadosh. Let's say you taka slipped into your default and you said Hakel HaKadosh instead of HaMelech HaKadosh. V'toich Kedei Dibur Nizkar, and then within the time period of Toich Kedei Dibur you realized your mistake and you remembered V'amar HaMelech HaKadosh, and you say the proper thing, you say HaMelech HaKadosh, then Eino Tzarech Lachzor, you don't have to go back. V'chein adin b'HaMelech HaMishpat. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on Nundal Amud Aleph near the bottom. Ice cut and bays with Tarkidei Dibur. How long is this time period of Tarkidei Dibur? Hainu shaloisha mishagamar hakel HaKadosh. This means that you didn't spend time once you finished saying hakel HaKadosh. Rak kidei shalosh tevos. The only amount of time that has elapsed since you said hakel HaKadosh was less than the time it would take you to say 3 words. Shalom alecha Rabbi. But if you delayed, if you hesitated longer than that, loy mahani chazarosai. So if you said Baruch atah Hashem hakel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh, so then you're good. Your correction is valid. If you go Baruch atah Hashem hakel HaKadosh or HaMelech HaKadosh, that was already too long, and now you have to go back. And this whole halacha only applies if you did not yet start the next bracha. But let's say what you did was like this. Baruch atah Hashem hakel HaKadosh atachayne l'adam das. So, and now it's still within Tarkidei Dibur, but you already said atachayne. So you already started the next bracha, now it's too late. If you already started the next bracha of atachayne, it doesn't help that it's still within Tarkidei Dibur, it's too late to make a correction. But if you did make the correction within the time period of Tarkidei Dibur, then Einoi Tzarech Lachzar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu afilu lo nizkar shu yemei tshuva. And this is true even if you spaced out to the extent that you totally forgot it was Aseres Yemei Tshuva. Ube'et she'amar Baruch atah Hashem, and when you said Baruch atah Hashem, haya b'daita gam ken l'sayim hakel HaKadosh. You were davening Shemona Esrei with kavana. You forgot that it was Aseres Yemei Tshuva. So you said Baruch atah Hashem, gebenched is the Rabbeinu Shalom, and you said it al das with kavana to end off the bracha hakel HaKadosh. Now we know that normally the kavana that you have in the beginning of the bracha has an effect. So over here the Chavetz Chaim is bavarning. Even though when you said Baruch atah Hashem, you had in mind to say hakel HaKadosh, since you corrected it to HaMelech HaKadosh, your correction is still valid as long as you made that correction Tarkidei Dibur. Afilu hachi kevin shel b'seif nizkav Amar HaMelech HaKadosh bahani. V'chein adin ois cut test. The same halacha applies by HaMelech HaMishpat. Of course, the Chavetz Chaim explains Azal Lishitase. The Mechaber is going to his previously stated opinion b'Sif HaKodim in Sif Aleph, where he said that if you make the mistake and you say HaMelech HaMishpat, you have to repeat Shemona Esrei. So the Mechaber is telling you here, V'chein adin b'HaMelech HaMishpat, that if you made the correction within Tarkidei Dibur, the correction is valid. However, according to the psak of the Ramah in Siman Kuf Yud Ches that we already alluded to, we paskin that you never have to go back for making the mistake and not saying HaMelech HaMishpat. Unless you didn't say Melech Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat, you said Keil Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat. Siv Gimel. B'Shabbos Bein Tayim, on Shabbos Shuvah, the Shabbos that's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Yomer Beberchas Me'ein Sheva HaMelech HaKadosh, we recite in the bracha Me'ein Sheva, we say HaMelech HaKadosh. So we know that on Shabbos, we have, very interesting, the only time just about that we have a Chazaras Hashatz, so to speak, by Ma'ariv. What do we have? We have what's called the brachas Me'ein Sheva, a bracha that encapsulates in it 7 brachas. And that is that we know Friday night after Ma'ariv, the Shliach Tzibur says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Elokei Lagadol Gibar V'Anari Kel Elyoin, Kainei Shamayim V'Aretz. And then we say the beautiful paragraph of Magen Avos. And in that paragraph we say Magen Avos Bidvaroi, Mechayem Eisim Emamaroi. And usually we say Hakel HaKadosh She'ein Kamayu. But on Shabbos Shuvah we don't say Hakel HaKadosh She'ein Kamayu. We say HaMelech HaKadosh She'ein Kamayu. So that's what the Mechaber says here. B'Shabbos Bein Tayim, the Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Shabbos Shuvah, Arvis by Ma'ariv, Friday night, Yomer Beberchas Be'ein Sheva HaMelech HaKadosh. In Magen Avos we say HaMelech HaKadosh instead of Hakel HaKadosh. Haga, v'hu adin mechal Rosh Hashanah b'Shabbos, and so too if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, Friday night when we say Berchas Be'ein Sheva, we say HaMelech HaKadosh, not Hakel HaKadosh. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yod HaMelech HaKadosh, V'im Tava Amar Hakel HaKadosh. If you inadvertently say Hakel HaKadosh in Magen Avos instead of HaMelech HaKadosh, Yesh Dayais Ba'achreinim Im Tzarech Lachzor. There's a difference of opinion amongst the Achreinim whether or not you should repeat the paragraph of Magen Avos. The Dafka Im Siyem HaBracha. However, this whole question is only germane to where you already closed off the paragraph of Magen Avos. But if you remembered before you finished the paragraph of Magen Avos, then you should go back and you should say HaMelech HaKadosh. Now I guess that's only negayah to the Shlich Tzibur. The Shlich Tzibur is the one who says the following paragraph of Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu and closes it off with Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos. So the Mishnah Berurah is telling me the Shlich Tzibur, if he said Hakel HaKadosh instead of HaMelech HaKadosh when he was saying the Berchas Be'ein Sheva in Magen Avos, so it depends. If he already finished off the whole thing and he said Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos, then there's a difference of opinion amongst the Achrayim whether or not he has to repeat it. But if he didn't yet say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos, then certainly he should go back to Magen Avos and he should say HaMelech HaKadosh. Okay. Then the Ramah said, V'hu adin imchal Rosh Hashanah b'Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yad Aleph, imchal Rosh Hashanah b'Shabbos. Ritzayin Lomar, what the Ramah wants to say is, if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, Yom Gankein b'Berchas Be'ein Sheva Shebelel Shabbos HaMelech HaKadosh. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, so again, Friday night, you say the Berchas Be'ein Sheva, and you say Magen Avos. So in Magen Avos, you should say HaMelech HaKadosh. Now let's finish off the Ramah here. Now the Ramah says, V'chayseim b'shal Shabbos levad. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, and you say Berchas Be'ein Sheva, Friday night by Ma'ariv, when the Shlich Tzibur finishes off the Bracha Be'ein Sheva, he only says Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos. He doesn't say Mekadosh HaShabbos v'Yom HaZikaron. He only says Mekadosh HaShabbos, v'chein kishachal Yom Kippur b'Shabbos. And so too if Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos. When the Shlich Tzibur finishes off the Brachas Be'ein Sheva, he says Mekadosh HaShabbos, not Mekadosh HaShabbos v'Yom, not Zikaron, v'Yom HaKippurim. You don't mention Yom Kippur. You only mention Shabbos. And the reason for that is because the Berchas Be'ein Sheva is a very strange creation. This Berchas Be'ein Sheva that we do Friday night, like I mentioned earlier, we never have a Chazaras Hashatz by Ma'ariv. So what is this Chazaras Hashatz of Ma'ariv that we have Friday night? That was a takana of the Geonim. And the Geonim made this takana because they were worried about people being stuck out in the field alone on Friday night by Ma'ariv. Somebody davened a little bit longer than everybody else. Now he's going to end up walking home alone and it could be dangerous. So what they did was they stretched out the end of the Friday night Ma'ariv davening by adding on the Berchas Be'ein Sheva. So that somebody who davens a little bit longer, by the time the Shlich Tzibur finishes the Berchas Be'ein Sheva, this person will be finished davening and he'll walk home with everybody else. So it's only a takanas Geonim. And since it's a takanas Geonim, we only do what the takanas Geonim was. The takanas Geonim was Berchas Be'ein Sheva on Friday night to close it off, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos. They didn't say that on Rosh Hashanah. You should say Mekadosh HaShabbos v'Yom HaZikaron. So we don't do it. Okay, Siv Daled. No, I didn't do Mishnah Berurah Yud Beis. The Chain Kishachal, if Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos, Ritzayin Loimar, Gam Kain Deina Chaysim B'Shal Yom Kippurim Rak B'Shal Shabbos. Again, the Shlich Tzibur finishes off the Brachas Be'ein Sheva with Mekadosh HaShabbos, not Mekadosh HaShabbos v'Yom Kippurim. Ubechol Yom Tov Shechal Yois B'Shabbos She'ena Maske B'Shal Yom Tov v'Chanal B'Siman Reish Samaches Sif Tes Ayin Sham. And this is true on every Yom Tov. Whenever Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, The Birchas B'Yein Shava is only closed off with Mekadosh HaShabbos, not with anything else. Siv Daled. Yesh Nagim, there are those who have the minhag lehispal b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim b'kriya, that when they daven on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they do it while bowed down. Utzrichem em lizkaif b'sayf habrachas, and the Mechaber says if you have this minhag, you have to stand up straight at the end of each bracha. You cannot end off each bracha while you are bowed down. Says the Mishnah Berurah Gimel b'kriya, they davened while bowed down. Why? Levisha anu tluyim badin, because we are hanging. We're hanging by a thread. Our lives are hanging by the Rabbeinu Shalom's judgment. Lefikach, therefore, yechaven lehispal be'emo be'yira, and therefore we have to be mechaven that we're davening be'emo be'yira, very solemn, very frightening. So they davened while bowed down. V'hinei miloshed zeh, from the language of the Mechaber it is implied, kishar kriya hamuzkar b'kasav eitzel Daniel, to have a baruch al birkahi. That this, that the Mechaber says that they had the minhag to daven b'kriya, means really b'kriya. It means on their knees. The chen b'shloimai, like it says by Daniel, baruch al birkahi, bow down on his knees. The chen b'shloimai, and so too by Shloimah, it says, come mikaraya al birkav. He got up from having been bowed down on his knees. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, ein na'agin kain. We don't have such a minhag to daven while we're on our knees. Ella rather, yispal b'kriyas roishai im gufay bilvad. People have the minhag to daven Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with their head and their upper body bowed over. That minhag they do have. Aiskat Yudalev, however, lizkaif b'saif, they have to stand up straight at the end of each bracha. Pirish kaidim sheyayim baruch atah. By each bracha in Shemona Esrei, before you say baruch atah, you have to stand up straight. V'hu adin b'tchilas habracha. And in the beginning of every bracha also you have to stand up straight. V'atam, the reason for this is shaloi lahisav al takanas chachamim, because we don't add on to the takanas of the chachamim. Shaloi tiknu ela b'tchilas avos v'haidah u'b'seifam, because we have takanas chachamim. We all know the halacha that there are certain places in Shemona Esrei where we bow. So we bow in the beginning of the bracha of avos, the very first bracha of Shemona Esrei. We go Baruch Atah Hashem, and we bow at the end of that bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avram. So too by the beginning of the bracha of Haidah, by Moedim, we bow down, Moedim Anachnu Lach, and then at the end, Baruch Atah Hashem Atoshim B'Chol Echad El Haidos. That's when we have a Takanas Chachamim to bow. So if you're going to bow on Rosh Hashanah, if you're going to daven Rosh Hashanah while bowed over, you have to make sure to stand up straight at the beginning and end of every other bracha. Otherwise, it looks like you're adding on to the Takanas Chachamim, and that we do not do. V'ayin le'el b'siman kuf yud gimel of the Mishnah Berurah Sham. Okay, we're going to stop over here. So Mirz Hashem, we'll pick up next time with Sif Hey near the bottom of the page, but we picked up a good part of the page over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The discussion of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need. Our learning should be a schus for Shlomo Zalman, Memesha, Menachem Medini Yehudis, and Yisrael Tzvi ben Ruchama Edel Roiza. They should all have Refuah Shalom of B'Sai Shar Chayil Yisrael. Be well.